Let's move to politics now, which is actually connected to this. The latest polling shows President Biden's approval rating holding strong as he approaches the 100-day mark. He is at 53% approval in the latest NBC News poll, 52% approval in the new Washington Post ABC News poll, and 58% in the CBS YouGov survey. According to NBC News numbers, that puts him ahead of President Trump's first 100 days, but behind Presidents Obama and George W. Bush. President Biden also received high marks for his handling of the country's most pressing issues. On the pandemic, his approval is at 69% in the NBC News poll. The Washington Post survey puts him at 64% and the CBS poll at 65%. The CBS News poll also shows 72% of Americans approve of how he's handled the vaccine distribution. When it comes to the economy, both NBC News poll and the Washington Post ABC poll have him at 52% approval. The CBS YouGov poll is at 57%. The president's infrastructure and jobs plan is also popular with most Americans. 59% support the proposal in the NBC News poll, 52% in the Washington Post poll, and 58% from CBS News. The situation at the southern border continues to take a toll on the president's immigration ratings. 59% disapprove of how he's handling immigration, according to the NBC News poll. The Washington Post shows 53% disapproval, and the CBS poll, 57% disapproval.
Jonathan Lemire, we saw comparisons 100 days in with past presidents. Still, these numbers look very high compared to what we've seen over the past 5 years. The Biden administration doing very well when it comes to the economy, doing very well when it comes to COVID, doing well when it comes to infrastructure, still struggling on the southern border. But 100 days in, I suspect this Biden administration is happy where they are. Tell us about it, and tell us what we plan to hear from the president when he speaks about his first 100 days this week.
Yeah, Joe, the 100-day mark, that's sort of an artificial arbiter, has become a moment to take stock of a young administration. And these poll numbers are indeed ones that hearten the White House. I've been talking to people inside the West Wing for recent days, looking forward to this week. We know that the president is going to address Congress Wednesday night to mark the 100 days. He is going to unveil more details of the second part of his infrastructure and jobs program that night. This one more about healthcare, childcare, more about the people piece of this, of infrastructure and jobs, rather than the traditional highways, subways, broadband, which we saw him unveil a few weeks ago. And basically, the president and his advisors believe that he was elected and his first 3+ months in office were about two central things. First, to just simply not be President Trump anymore, who was so divisive, whose leadership during the pandemic was scattershot, to put it kindly, to someone who had really turned up the temperature in Washington. And my colleagues and I at the AP have begun looking at what this president has done in the last 3 months. And it's about taking the temperature down. It's about being quieter, about being a little bit less of a presence, frankly, in Americans' everyday lives. So therefore, we do hear from him in big moments, like when he marked the 500,000 dead from COVID, or the 1-year anniversary of the lockdown. And again, Wednesday night, his words carry more meaning. He's able to talk about the grief and the struggles that Americans have had over the last year, because his own life has been infused with such tragedy, but also pointing to a road ahead. And the second piece, of course, it's all connected, is the vaccines and handling of the pandemic, and how the distribution has really ramped up, and how now any American adult who wants one can get one. They know that there are populations that need to be convinced to take it, but the president has received strong marks for his leadership of the pandemic so far, and they believe they can build off this for the next 100 days.
And Applebaum, these are numbers we haven't seen for a U.S. president in some time, at least 5 years. Joe Biden has been trying to be more moderate temperamentally, to lower the temperature. But you dig into these numbers and you see the sort of tribalism that you've talked about, the sort of tribalism that has fed illiberal forces globally over the past 5-10 years. And you see actually Joe Biden have lower approval ratings among Republicans and higher disapproval ratings among Republicans in some of these polls than even Barack Obama. The tribalism here just as fierce or perhaps even more fierce despite his higher numbers?
Yeah, I'm afraid that's something that's going to be with us for some time. The polarization that, of course, existed before President Trump was increased and deepened during his presidency. And there's still a large part of the Republican Party and, of course, of the pro-Republican media that sees this as an advantage. They think that they can win office or win viewers or win attention by deepening it, by focusing on culture war issues, by keeping people in a state of anger and frustration, by keeping emotions raised. And as long as that's the way they're doing politics, I'm afraid those divisions will continue. One of the best antidotes to that kind of the divisive culture war politics is the focus on real things, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's building roads and bridges, whether it's getting people vaccines, whether it's anything that people feel in their real lives. The more Biden can get people to look at those things and to think about them and talk about them, the better off we'll all be. I think he's done a pretty good job so far. But again, keeping the focus, keeping the conversation about reality and not about emotion, not about symbols. This is a way in which he can begin to pull the nation together.
If somebody had just actually come out of the woods after sleeping like Rip Van Winkle for 10 years, they might hear you say, talk about real things. What else would he be talking about? Of course, there we go again to the politics of gesture that we've seen, as you've written about so eloquently, in Poland and Hungary. And what we saw here with Donald Trump, whether it was building a wall, which he never, even when Republicans were in charge, they really didn't even want to fund that wall, whether it was that health care plan that was always 2 weeks away from being launched, whether it was attacks against these nefarious forces which didn't really exist. This is, again, it is such a difference between the politics and the governing by gesture versus getting 200 million shots into people's arms and building, getting plans to build roads, to build infrastructure, to build a new electric grid. So many things differently domestically happening. Ed Luce, I'm just wondering, though, let's go from his first 100 days domestically to his first 100 days on the foreign policy side. And yes, you see confrontations with China, you see confrontations with Russia, you see him drawing the lines in some areas. At the same time, you also hear of overtures quietly to Russia, possibilities, overtures to China. And over the past week or so, we've seen both of these countries, both of these rivals, Russia more of an adversary. We see both of them responding in a way that may present an opening.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Russia one is particularly problematic. As you know, Putin had 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border up until the end of last week, and thankfully has pulled them back. Alexei Navalny, the dissident who was on hunger strike, has also called off his hunger strike. So the temperature's gone down a little bit there. And Putin may be in more of a position to accept Biden's invitation for a summit with him. I don't think there's going to be any sort of talk of a reset of relations with Russia under Biden. He has called Putin a killer. He's made that very plain. He's said earlier that he's looked into Putin's soul and discovered he doesn't have a soul, in contrast to what George W. Bush said many years ago. So this is going to be a very difficult, probably insoluble problem, one that Biden just has to manage. The bigger one, though, is China. And again, the tensions there have been extremely high. They've been ratcheting up. The vulnerability of Taiwan is, I think, the most potentially explosive problem of the Biden years. But they can talk on other stuff like climate change, which they did again at the end of last week. Biden held a virtual climate change meeting that Xi Jinping, China's leader, attended. John Kerry, Biden's global warming czar envoy, has visited China. it's going to be a much more frustrating and back and forth yo-yoing kind of foreign policy than we're seeing in terms of Biden's much more radical, much more ambitious domestic policy. So we're not going to get sort of big 100-day moments here, but it marks a pretty dramatic contrast to the foreign policy by tweet and by caprice that we saw under Donald Trump.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.